Hello and welcome back to the channel. Professor Cantonio here in another video, continuing on the series of learning Japanese with the Pokedex entries. So we are now on episode 2 and we'll be covering Ivysaur, known as Fushigi Soul. Fushigi Soul. Bulbasaur was known as Fushigi Dane. We're keeping the Fushigi from Fushigi Dane, and Fushigi means strange. If you did not see the last episode, it means strange or mysterious. Our last time we used dane, but this time we're using soul. So if you type in soul, actually this kanji conveniently comes up for me. Alright, we have the kusa kanji. Now normally this kanji is pronounced kusa, as in, and it means grass, weed, or herb. But if you look under the details, you can see that its onyomi, one of its readings, is soul. It's written in katakana right here. But this is the same as soul. It's the exact same meaning. It's just sometimes whenever they're creating Pokemon or creating names, they just use some of the other readings from the kanji. But it means the same thing. It's using this kanji, it means grass. So like strange grass or strange herb, something along those lines. It's keeping the same pattern from the first name. All right, moving on, we have the bunrui. Bunrui is classification, and it's classified the same as Fushigi-dane, which is the Tane Pokemon, meaning the seed Pokemon. Obviously, the seed on his back has grown a little bit, but it's still the seed Pokemon. Type is Kusa and Doku, which means grass and poison. Takasa, it's grown a little bit, 1 meter now, and omosa, weight, it is now 13 kilograms. Tokusei. So actually, its Tokusei is the same as before, it's Shinyoku, and we discussed this in the last video, but we'll just read it real quick. HP が減ったとき、草タイプの技の威力が上がる. Basically meaning when your health is low, the power of grass type moves increases. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of that, go watch the last video and I spend some more time talking about it. On the side, here are the stats: HP, 攻撃、防御、特攻、特防, and 素早さ. How do they compare? Well, I guess they're around the same. A little bit more than Bulbasaur. Okay, so moving on to the main part, we're going to be covering Fushigi Soul's Pokedex entry. So, starting from the beginning. We'll just go ahead and we'll read the whole thing. So, 背中のつぼみが膨らみ出すと甘い匂いが漂い始める。大輪の花が咲く前触れ. So, we're going to break this down little by little. As a general rule, if there's like a long sentence or a long statement and you're just trying to figure it out, just break it down by particles. So the main particles that we want to break things down are anything that stops the flow of the sentence. And the more Japanese you learn, the more that you'll be able to understand what stops the sentence. But a good starter is any wa or ga particles. So we'll start off with that. Right here in the beginning, we have seinaka no tsubomi ga. So this is going to be the first part we break down. So the ga particle marks the subject of the sentence. So the noun that's before the ga will be the subject of what we're talking about. So we need to know this word tsubomi. So we'll go ahead and type that in. Tsubomi. It's going to give us this kanji automatically. And it means a flower bud. So right here we know that, and this makes sense because we're talking about the seed Pokemon, the Tane Pokemon. So having a tsubomi as the subject makes sense. But we still have some stuff before tsubomi that we need to talk about. Seinaka no tsubomi ga. So when you have the no particle in between two nouns, it connects it. You can't have two nouns next to each other without the no particle. And the word seinaka, if you were paying attention to the last video, you should remember meaning seinaka, and it means the back of the body. So seinaka no tsubomi. So we have the seed, and what kind of seed? The seed on the back, seinaka no, the back seed. And now we know the subject because it's before the ga particle, so we know this is what it's talking about, and we're going to move on. So the next part is fukuramidasu to. Now this has a couple things going on. Even though it's just this one part, we're going to use this to as a particle, and we'll get to that in a second. So, fukuramidasu. Now, this is actually two verbs in one. Fukuramu, which is right here, And hukaramu means to expand, to swell, to get big, to be inflated. It's basically like a balloon. As something gets bigger and expands like that, that's hukaramu. But we have hukarami dasu, not hukaramu. So how do we get there? So this dasu at the end is actually, it's a suffix, and it can be attached to the end of a verb. And how it works is that you put the verb that you attach it to, that you want to attach to dasu, and you have to put it in the mas form, so the polite form. So if you don't know how to conjugate to the mas form, basically you take the end of it, you take the last thing, because all verbs in their base form end in u, so you'll change it to the e form. So hukaramu becomes hukarami, and then you add hukarami and you add mas to the end, hukarami mas. But in order to use this grammar, the rule is you get rid of the mas. So we're left with hukarami. Then you add dasu to the end, and we get hukarami dasu. Now, what does this mean? When you add dasu to the end of a verb after putting it in this form, it means that you start to do something, or something starts to happen. So in this case, hukaramu will mean, it by itself, hukaramu will mean it will expand, it will get big, it will inflate. But hukarami dasu means that it begins to expand, it begins to inflate, it begins to get bigger. It's emphasizing that it's going to begin. Now we have this to at the end, and to is a particle that can do a couple different things. You might have seen to doing something with nouns, meaning the word and. So if you have two nouns and you put it between to, then like tabemono to nomimono, that means food and water. But this to is after a verb, so it cannot mean and in this case. In this case, the to particle means when. So how this works is that when you use this to particle to mean when, it means when action A happens, which action A is always before to, action B is guaranteed to happen, or it will always happen. So something to, the next thing happens. And it's not something, it's basically something that always happens. It has to always happen if you use the word to. So right now we have the bud on its back. This is the subject. And what is it doing? It begins to expand. And the to marks when. So when the seed on its back begins to expand. So when this happens, something else will happen afterwards. So let's keep going to figure out what's going to happen. We have amai nioi ga tadayoi hajimeru. So we have the ga particle right here. So we're going to take a break and we're going to stop. We're going to figure out what we're talking about. So before ga, we have nioi. Nioi is going to be the subject. So what is nioi? Nioi is a noun meaning odor, scent, smell. Okay, so we know the subject of this next part is a smell. Now we have to figure out what kind of smell. So we're going to work backwards and we're going to see what's modifying it. So we have the word amai. So right now we can tell that it's an adjective. If it was another noun, there would be a no particle right here. Or if it was a na adjective, it would have a na. So it ends in an e, so we know it's an e adjective. So we have amai, meaning sweet tasting, sweet, sugary, or in this case, we're talking about a smell because we know the word nioi, so we can use this definition, fragrant smelling. So basically a sweet smell. So that's what we got, amai nioi. So that is the subject of this next part. Now, what is this sweet smell doing? Tadayoi hajimeru. So this is very, very similar to the grammar that we just covered with hukarami dasu, but we'll explain that in a second. So it's two parts. We have the word tadayo, and this word, if you go ahead and look at it, it can mean a couple different things, but we know the subject is a scent. So if you look right here on definition 2, it means to hang in the air. So your scent, you just feel it, you can feel it around you, and you know when the smell does that. But it's another grammar case right here with hajimeru. So tadayo, just like how hukaramu was, it got changed to the mas form. So right here is tadayoimasu would be the mas form of tadayo. And so now it is tadayoi with hajimeru. And hajimeru is very, very similar to dasu. It's almost the same thing. Hajimeru means to start. So in this case, it means the scent, the sweet scent, begins to hang in the air. So it's very, very similar, dasu and hajimeru, and there's really not too much difference. There's some small nuances on what you can and can't do, but we can go more in depth on that a different time. But basically, no, if you want something to sound like it suddenly happened, you're better off using dasu. But if something suddenly happens, you can still use hajimeru. Yeah, but we'll just move on for now. So next we have, so this first sentence is Senaka no tsubomi ga fukuramidasu to amai nioi ga tarayoi hajimeru. So we'll read it backwards just to understand the first sentence. The scent, the sweet scent, begins to hang in the air when the seed on its back begins to expand. So every time that the seed begins to expand, a sweet smell fills the air. The next sentence, Tairin no hana ga saku maibere. So again, we have the particle ga right here. So we're going to work on this and we're going to work backwards. So before ga is a noun, the word hana. Now, hana, if you're just writing hiragana, you might get a few words that pop up under the definition. And the first one that pops up is flower, and that makes sense. We're talking about flowers. It also can mean nose, but obviously in this case, even though we don't have the kanji, we can pretty much assume that it means flower. So our subject right now is hana, the flower. So what kind of flower? We have the no particle at the end, so we know that this is a noun before. It's not an e adjective, otherwise it would end in e, and it's not an na adjective, otherwise it would end in na. It's also not being modified by a verb, so we know this is a noun. Tairin. Now if you type in tairin, you get a large flower. Just so we can have a better idea, I actually typed this in on Google as a tairin no hana, and this is what comes up. So it's just a flower with a large petal. Here's some examples of what that might look like. But we'll go back in here. So tairin no hana ga. Now we have the subject, but we need to figure out what is the subject doing. So we'll read the rest of the sentence. Saku maibure. So we're just going to look up both these words right now because that's the end of the sentence. So saku. What does saku mean? The first thing that comes up when we have saku, it's actually the only thing that comes up. Oh, it's because it typed in this kanji, but this kanji makes sense right now. So to bloom, to flower, to blossom, this makes perfect sense. So the flower will blossom, but that is not the end of the sentence. We have maibure. So we need to figure out what this means. So maibure, advanced warning, previous notice, prior announcement. Basically, it's a sign of something that will happen. So saku maibure means it's a sign that it's going to bloom. It's a sign something is going to happen. So we'll read the sentence from the beginning. We have ga to find out the subject. The flower, the large petaled flower, what is it going to do? It's a sign it's going to bloom. So we'll read the whole thing. Senaka no tsubomi ga fukuramidasu to amai nioi ga tarayoi hajimeru. Tairin no hana ga saku maibure. So the seed, when the seed on its back begins to expand, a sweet smell fills the air. This is a sign that a large petaled flower is going to blossom. All right, so that covers it for Hushigiso. It makes perfect sense, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys on the next episode. All right, see ya.